The railroad's gonna go back.
Hi there, Amanda Pitzer and Ella Belling. I'm going to turn it over to you all. Nathan, are you?
Actually, yeah, so it's going to be myself, then Augie, and then we're going to jump over to Amanda.
All right, so
Okay. Okay. I'm going to spotlight on Augie.
Well, I'm going to do a little introduction. So yeah,
okay.
I can kick it off now.
Okay.
But welcome back. And they certainly did not have enough time there. So we're talking about doing some webinar sessions over the next couple of months. And now that Kelly is the professional webinar session, I don't know what you call that, expert, but now that she has all the buttons checked and everything, so we'll have plenty of opportunity to do that in the future. But if you're lucky enough to still be with us, and I know it's a lot of Zoom in the morning here, we have Augie Carlino coming up here, and he's our closer keynote. Jerry Morris mentioned Augie as a potential keynote, and I was like, oh, how can I forget Augie? Of course. And I started talking to him, and the story that he was telling me was like, oh, that sounds like the future that could be West Virginia. So I'm going to turn it over to, or I'm going to do Augie's introduction here, and then we'll turn it over to him. So Augie has been involved with National Heritage Areas for 30 years. His professional experience started on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and later as a lobbyist for an international law firm. He used that legislative policy and advocacy experience to build Rivers of Steel National Heritage Area. He also consults with National Heritage Area, other National Heritage Areas like Appalachia National Heritage Area, nonprofits and other businesses on organization development, governance, advocacy, and fundraising. And somehow he manages to keep good humor about all these things. I added that last part. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Augie for about 15 minutes or so.
Jeremy, sorry, Nathan, I'm getting set up here.
Or I might be doing Augie's presentation for him.
Okay, I just didn't know if we wanted to go ahead and are we doing the presentation and then moving to our other thing? Okay, all right. I see Augie in the room, and let's see, I've asked him to start his video. So if he does that, I will spotlight him.
All right, well, it seems like we need to switch things up now. How about we go over to Amanda and we'll jump to them for a couple minutes, then we'll come back to Augie as we troubleshoot.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm gonna switch back over to Amanda on the trail. Here we go. Okay. Hi, Amanda and Ella. We see you on the trail. Go for it.
And yeah, we didn't get to do a sound test. We hope you can all hear us. Yeah, hello everyone. It's great to be on this conference and right out on the rail trails today. It doesn't have to be a fair weather thing, you know. So I just want to thank Augie. If that presentation happened, I appreciate all the inspiring things that he's said to advance us into our trail communities as we come to the close of our conference. It is a time of Thanksgiving, and I just am here. I'm Ella, and I'm here with Amanda Pitzer with Friends of the Cheat, and we're out celebrating rail trails and also wanting to give a good thank you to everybody who has participated and been involved and has made this conference happen. So I'm here to be kind of that spokesperson of Thanksgiving. So first, I'd like to thank all of our presenters and the keynote speaker, Peter Harnick. If people haven't already gotten connected about that, I have right here. I want you to go out and get the book. It's a great book. And I also have in my library Deciding on Trails by Amy Camp, and also a wonderful thing to promote trail town efforts across our state. So I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to that and a thank you to them for their good words and all of our presenters that kind of help lead the conversations. I also want to especially thank the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, without which this conference would not be happening. Especially a thank you to Mary Hunt, who has made this possible and has been an advocate for trails for a very long time in West Virginia and in Pennsylvania. Thank you to the Rails to Trails Conservancy, and it's been a great partnership for a while, a really long time, and we have especially wonderful Kelly Pack involved with West Virginia, and then the West Virginia Trail team, which is Kent Spellman and Jeremy Morris, and we're excited to have them working for that effort too. The National Park Service's Recreational Trails Conservation Assistance Program, Nathan Hilbert and Shanazia Silman, thank you for all of your efforts and those many hours that you put in. So grateful. I also have a wish to thank you to those people on the West Virginia Trail Conference Planning Committee who also kept gathering on Zoom, kept gathering until we tried to work out all the kinks and all the information that we wanted to get out to our trail community. So I hope you felt like they're engaged. They certainly want to be engaged with all of you, and I hope that that will continue well after this day and this end of the conference. Finally, I really want to appreciate Friends of the Cheat, Amanda Pitzer and Lisa Marafa, who have been the dream team of making this camera work and making all of our cameras work, and doing all the behind the scene efforts to make us feel comfortable talking to you throughout the conference. So thank you to Friends of the Cheat. And then lastly, I just want to say a big shout out to everybody who has come on and has participated and been involved in the conversations. It's been a wonderful thing to see all the different levels of interest, from trail user to trail advocate to leaders in our trail community. So thank you for joining us. We hope that that is just the start of this engagement, and we hope you feel less alone in your efforts in your communities, and will start feeling like you have a support team out here ready to, you know, galvanize and advocate for you and make things happen across the state. Thank you.
Oh, Ella, that was great. I'm so happy you could join me here outside today. As you know, we hustled to put together this virtual conference. It truly has taken a village. And as part of the planning discussions, the conference committee really wanted to incorporate, different aspects to an in-person conference, but we just really didn't have all the time. So getting outside here today has been great, but really I am tricking you. This is an elaborate ruse to recognize you, Ella, and give you the very first West Virginia Trails Award. So there was one person who stood out to the committee. Oh, I'm getting emotional. And when this person wasn't listening, we didn't sign you up for anything other than to come here today, which, you don't go to meetings, you often get volunteers. So you're our first awardee. So Ella, it is my sincere pleasure to present you with the yet to be titled award from the West Virginia Trail Organization. I'm going to read this because we had a lot of contributions from your peers. So I'm going to read the nomination while we spoil Ella. So Ella has been sitting on the right side of history in our little college town of Morgantown for many years. In 1991, when the CSX Railroad decided to abandon their corridor through Morgantown, the Mon River Trails Conservancy was formed 30 years ago this year. Shortly thereafter, upon returning to WVU to pursue an MS degree in Recreation Parks and Tourism Resources at WVU, Ella became a volunteer for MRTC. In 2000, she became the director of the MRTC, overseeing the development of the Mon River and Deckers Creek Rail Trails, a 3-county, 48-mile linear park in north central West Virginia. This vibrant trail network is a critical link to the Parkersburg to Pittsburgh corridor, envisioned by the Industrial Heartland Trails Coalition in its plan to connect more than 1,500 miles of multi-use trails in West Virginia. Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. Ella was involved from the get-go to pull together the big vision. I'm pretty sure her attendance and participation rate for this multi-state project has been over 95%. That's from Peggy, I think. She keeps her hands, ears, and eyes on the prize. For North Central West Virginia, these trails have been a catalyst for major revitalization and additional public spaces, turning decaying industrial eyesores into vibrant public spaces, supporting social, cultural, and recreational activities. For the last 21 years, to create a successful rail trail system, Ella has led innovative collaborations with community partners, government officials, philanthropic organizations, university, local business, and a diverse volunteer base to transform industrial wastelands into economic and environmental renewal. So our candles are burning out, so I'm going to skip to the real good part. In 2020, the Rails to Trails Conservancy, the nation's largest trails organization, inducted West Virginia's 48-mile Mon River Rail Trail System into the iconic Rail Trail Hall of Fame. Ella has patiently and successfully navigated the barriers to building rail trail for the MRTC while never turning away other trail builders in West Virginia or the surrounding region that seek guidance. She also serves as president for the West Virginia Rails to Trails Council and has held a variety of other mostly volunteer roles for over 2 decades, where I met you as a board member for Friends of Deckers Creek in 2007. All right, here we go. Ella may see her success as a quality, well-connected trail, but to the many people in the MRTC trail shed, her success can be measured in human connections and support for a happy, healthy, proud community. In this COVID-19 time of great despair and disconnection, the physical path she has helped build has been a path that has sustained lives and provided light and life in a time of darkness. Without Ella and the trails she helped build and maintain, many would be lost. That was from Christian. Under Ella's guidance, MRTC has turned an abandoned rail corridor into a trail system that is repeatedly described as the best thing to happen in the region in the last 50 years. We know she doesn't like to stand in the limelight. Oh man, this is awful for her, right? And she doesn't like to take any credit, but she has a stickiness or a stick it to you-ness that never fails. So Ella, on behalf of West Virginia Trails, the Morgantown community, Mon, Preston, Marion counties, and people all over the damn country, thank you. We love you. We did it. We surprised her. And this is a photo of a trail marker that Jamie Lester has in production that will be presented to Ella, and you can put it everywhere. Guess what? We gave you a project to do now. I think we're good here. Do you want to say anything? She's so bad.
Cheered me up enough. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you,
thanks,
Trent.
Ella.
I believe in
Thank you, Ella.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your great comments of support to Ella in the chat. That's great. Nathan, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm all
Thank you.
teary-eyed.
Ella missed a meeting one time and we were kind of sitting there like, wouldn't it be nice to give an award to somebody? And everyone's like, yeah, obviously that's Ella. So, so that was a really easy decision. I'm happy that all worked out. Look forward to seeing what they come up with for the little statue there. So at this point, I know it's going to be a hard act to follow there, but I'm going to ask Augie to turn on his mic and camera. There he is. And take it away, Augie, for the next 15 minutes or so.
Well, that is a hard act to follow, and Ella deserves all those recognitions and awards. Congratulations. And I was a little worried. She was running out of hands to hold everything, you know. So, hey, thank you all for inviting me to speak to you today. As we live in this wonderful world of a COVID environment, it's amazing this technology allows so many people to gather together. I, like you, would much rather be in person, but we're not, and we make the best of it. I'm looking at the list of participants, or had looked at it, a lot of familiar names, friends, colleagues. Good to see you all. Some new names there. Hope to meet you all someday soon. For those that do know me and don't know me, I'm Augie Carlino. I'm President and Chief Executive Officer of Rivers of Steel National Heritage Area. We're based out of Homestead, Pennsylvania, just downriver from many of you along the Monongahela River. We're one of the 55 national heritage areas in the country. And within the Commonwealth, we're one of 12 state heritage areas, several of which of those are national heritage areas. Today, and I'm going to share my screen right now, so I hope it works. Please let me know, Nathan, if that shows up.
That looks great, as long as you put it in present mode.
Yep.
There you go.
There you go. Today, what I want to talk to you about is how do you build these trail coalitions to advance trails for your communities? You guys have already done amazing work. And I saw from the presenter just before, at least a comment, the suggestion about the successes in Pennsylvania and Ohio for matching trail funding. I think our 3 states are actually leading the way in the Northeast region, if not for a good part of the country, in trail development and the network of trails that's being developed and connected to link the entire country through. And that's amazing. I will tell you, though, that at the beginning of this, 30 years ago when I started, trails were a concept. There were a few of them. I point to this image right now because this is a network of rails to trails, primarily rails to trails in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. 30 years ago, this did not exist. And so the question is, how do you get to this level of trails throughout a state when at that point in time, the concept of rails trails was fairly new. And there were a lot of different trail organizations out there that had interest for very specific components. I hope you can see my cursor, but I'm going to be focusing the talk today right on this section. But before I do, I want to take you to this next slide, and I'll bring you back to this one after we look at this, because I think this next slide points to a lot of what was instrumental for the state of Pennsylvania's success in building rails to trails. It wasn't just these 12, but it was the coalition that these 12 built in order to make those trails come about. And that coalition included the Rails to Trails Conservancy, a whole bunch of other organizations, foundations. But, across the Commonwealth, there are 6 national heritage areas that are designated. Those are listed there. Delaware and Lehigh, I have them numbered for you. Lackawanna Valley, Oil Regions, Rivers of Steel, which I obviously again run, Schuylkill River Valley and the Susquehanna River, the newest national heritage area just added to the system of 55. They were added in 2019. But all of these heritage areas exist within a statewide system of heritage areas across the Commonwealth. And that statewide system has been around since 1990. Those state-only heritage areas, not to diminish their importance at all when I say only, but they don't have a national designation. When you add them to this list, Allegheny Ridge, Endless Mountains, Lincoln Highway, Lumber, National Road, and PA Route 6, that corridor across the top, they all came together with a concerted effort out of their plans to use not only, for some of them, industrial heritage conservation, but heritage tourism and recreational development as components for their heritage area strategies. And when I say those recreational components, again, I'll take you back to this picture, because if you remember where the imprint of those heritage areas are along the Commonwealth, it is not a coincidence that the majority of these trails exist within these heritage areas across the state. That was a deliberate planning effort that not only was advanced by these heritage areas as a part of their early planning, but was supported by the state department that was advocating and advancing the heritage area trails network. Now, I want you to know that what I just said is not as simple as what actually happened, because at the very beginning, there was great trepidation, a lot of impediments, to building trails. And you know what a lot of them are. You've got land right issues, you've got private property issues, you've got other issues that affect working together, the need to build partnerships. And that all came together pretty much right here on this one section of trail through Southwest Pennsylvania, through 3 or 4 counties that we all know because we share with you part of this Great Allegheny Passage as it connects into Cumberland, Maryland, in the northern part just outside of your state. But that Great Allegheny Passage that connects to the C&O Canal towpath in Cumberland was something that when it was first proposed, everybody thought was absolutely crazy and would never happen. It wasn't that they doubted the people. Actually, it was that they doubted the people. But more than that, what they doubted was the ability to put together this passage because of so many different obstacles that existed physically on land, funding wise, cooperation wise, strategic planning was a need, and competition. And when I say competition, this trail network that you see through Pennsylvania was actually proposed by several supporting trail groups. When I say supporting, they were all friends, but they were all competing as well for funding. And that's where back in the probably 1990 or mid 1990s, Rivers of Steel was asked to help assist this because at least in the part of the trail network for the Great Allegheny Passage, there were 3 major trail organizations, all of which had an incredibly good idea. And in some cases, were building components, segments of their trails. And they were all talking to each other. But each one of them had their trail as a priority for the trail that should be funded by the Pittsburgh-based foundations. And we, Rivers of Steel, we're not in the trail building business like some of the other national heritage areas and state heritage areas are, but we have the interest in the trail because for our themes, trails run through the themes that we talk about by way of Rivers of Steel. Obviously, a lot of these are along abandoned rail lines, and these trails no doubt intersect some of the properties that we are involved in redeveloping. My background on my image is one of them, the Carey Furnaces National Historic Landmark in Swissville and Rankin. So because we were seen as a neutral party and we were working with these individual trail groups, a couple of the foundations asked us to help coordinate their efforts. And so we did. And what we did with them was said, look, we got to come up with a plan. And that plan's got to be where all of you are advocating for the trail development that you're working on, but all you are advocating for the greater good. And each trail can't be more important than the others to prioritize when you go to the foundations. We got to create a systematic approach to how these trails are going to be developed. What land is available to develop? What land needs to be nurtured a little bit more? Where are the political pressure points that we need to put on certain individuals? Where do we need to buy land? All of that had to be strategized and prioritized in order for the sense of this trail to come to a much fuller recognition. There were major obstacles to overcome beyond what I just talked about, physical obstacles that were important to be either restored, developed, or opened up. There were tunnel lines along this in through the mountains in Fayette, Somerset counties, and as they go out. Some of these tunnels had been closed down and abandoned for many years. There were trail bridges that needed to be either constructed or the acquisition of trail or bridges that belonged to railroads that were abandoned and converted then into a safe, usable hiking and biking. That involved a whole bunch of other layers of state bureaucracy, all of which you all know and no doubt deal with. Your transportation agency at your state level, us working with PennDOT, But then your regional transportation organizations at your county or at your metropolitan level that prioritize funding. There was the funding that was coming in from the federal government at the beginning of all this by way of, who can remember very way back, the very first transportation enhancement grants that came out that were the T transportation programs. And then the growing or the changing of that name each time it got reauthorized. Ice-T, T21. I don't even know what beverage or flavor of tea we're on right now with these new transportations. I saw the acronym on the earlier presentation, THUD. And I'm assuming the T in that is transportation and housing and urban development, but I don't know. But anyway, I sidetracked. What we had was incredible barriers to this that not only individual trails needed to work on, but needed to become the priority for all the trail organizations working in order to make that gap a reality. And this one section of trail was what the Great Allegheny Passage Conservancy right now on their website has shown, this actual image, as the impossible 9 miles. This was the last section of that Great Allegheny Passage that was built because the obstacles here were so much so that no one outside of the trail groups, no one believed would ever be completed. The gap would ever be completed because of this. This section of 9 miles was running through 3 abandoned steel mill sites, abandoned of US Steel, along a major US Steel coke gas pipeline, along railroad right-of-ways, abandoned railroad bridges, and other sections of private property. I think on overall 28 or 29 individual pieces of property that all needed to be acquired and linked. And in some cases, the property owners were supportive of the effort, but in other cases, the property owners either were not supportive, not because they didn't want the trail, but they were concerned about liability. One of those being right here, the amusement park that Kennywood owned, Sandcastle, was a problem. And this coke gas pipeline right here that US Steel owned. Those were the 2 last major obstacles in this entire trail building effort along the gap. And so what we all ended up doing is a concerted effort of advocacy, community organizing, and basically public relations strategy as these properties came together to push that development so that the gap could be created. Now, when I say we, at this point in time, Rivers of Steel has sort of stepped back from that early role of organizing those trail constituencies, those 3 that you saw in the gap. And really, at this point, it became the lead of the organization that some of you may know, Linda McKenna Box at the McKenna Foundation headed. She is the lead of this whole Allegheny Trail Alliance, later to become the GAP. It was her and that coalition of trail groups that came out of that early coalescing and organizing effort that Rivers of Steel staff was helpful in putting together. And that was the beginning of the GAP. So to close on this, as I think I'm closing in on my time limit, what are the issues that we had to overcome? And probably some of these issues are things that you are confronting for West Virginia on your individual trails. The first thing is that one lone trail in 1978, a part of that gap that was an abandoned railroad section that was donated to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. That was the first trail built in 1978. There was money set aside for it. It was primarily in the area of Connellsville to Ohiopyle, if you know the geography region that I'm talking about. That gave the seed to the concept of this larger trail network. Then everybody started to talk about how do we connect this? Because as we all know, railroads don't exist in little segments. They're part of a much larger network. And almost all of that was abandoned in Southwest Pennsylvania because that network of trails, not only active lines right now on CSX railway right now, but a defunct railroad, which was internal to U.S. Steel, which completely was out of business. The larger part of that rail network or trail network was a part of that Union Railroad, which was a subsidiary of U.S. Steel. That was a larger part of it. So that all had to be connected and built. And everybody believed that as good of an idea it was, because of the organizations and the companies, the corporations that we were dealing with, and the whole issue of combining trails together on these abandoned railroads, that it would be impossible to build. And therefore, that link to Cumberland could never be made. What was impeding that was, as I said earlier, the view that everybody had in their trail organization. And I love when organizations advocate strongly for what their mission is and what they're trying to accomplish. But everybody was saying, our trail is critical to this larger trail development. And therefore, the message that was being conveyed to the funders or to legislators in Harrisburg was their trail should be funded before any of the other trails. That had to stop. And what I said earlier on, that concerted planning effort then led to the development of an overall strategy for linking all those trails and getting them to come together. There was an effort to coordinate. There was an effort to plan. There was an effort to fundraise. And that's where Linda and her organization began to step in and take over on that effort. I will tell you folks, PennDOT was not a friend in this early trail development. When those first rounds of T20 T transportation money came in, PennDOT, like all transportation networks, they think roads and highways and bridges. But as we know, there's intermodal funding in there. And it took a great effort to get PennDOT to look at trails as a component of intermodal transportation, because they were only thinking of intermodal transportation as the typical things that everyone thought as an intermodal. What do you do by way of public transportation or building more highways that are HOV, transportation or traffic reducing highways? We had to turn PennDOT's thinking around, and that was no easy thing to do. But we did have not only this concerted effort of trail organizations, but we had the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. The word resources is missing from there, or maybe it's there it is. I had another part to that. They were a friend and a strong advocate. Why? Well, PADCNR, as we call them in Pennsylvania, they're the organization that house this whole network of heritage areas within the Commonwealth. And so because those heritage areas had as a part of their strategic plans, trail building across the Commonwealth, DCNR stepped in and at the Harrisburg level began to open up conversations with PennDOT to make trail building a priority within the state. That was important. We then began to work on targeting supportive legislators and then the regional planning organizations. That last part, the regional planning organizations, because they're so tied to the transportation agency at the state level, they were hard to convince. But when we identified key legislators in Harrisburg at the state level, and then others at the federal level, we began to put political pressure on those regional transportation organizations to prioritize trails as a part of the transportation enhancement funding that was coming to the Commonwealth. And when they did that, that also helped PennDOT move along in its issue. What we worked on, and everyone worked on, but really what we worked on at Rivers of Steel was to build capacity and then step back. Once we create stewards for this, we step back and become a partner. We don't walk away from it, but we step back from it and become a partner. When I say build capacity, at the early level, we, along with all those other heritage areas across the state, where a lot of them are still trail building organizations today, but several of them, like Rivers of Steel, aren't. And they just build capacity. They become sort of back of the house agencies to help those volunteer organizations move along. And once they become up and able to survive on their own, have active, well-run, good governance organizations and volunteer boards, then the heritage area became a partner. That was a primary role that Rivers of Steel played, and we still play as that. As a matter of fact, we help right now still get money into the trail, that section that runs through the heritage area that we manage, in order to help the GAP, to help the individual trail organizations build certain parts of their trail, improve trailheads, and put in interpretive markers, all the other things that are important along a trail. That's what we have been doing at Rivers of Steel. And then the last thing, and this is important because I'll quickly go back, well, I can't without eliminating all these, but if you go back to that 9-mile impossible section, this became a deliberate, concerted strategy that we devised, and that is build those sections that can be built right now, and then squeeze the holdouts. And those holdouts almost became a public relations nightmare for those organizations, those companies, those institutions that were worried about a trail coming near or through their property. And in the end, that gap was built, except for smaller parts of that 9-mile section. And when it became that critical of an issue, that's when you saw in Pittsburgh region, bigger powers coming to the table. Our county executive at that time, Dan Honorato, literally took U.S. Steel and sat them down and said, you cannot be the impediment on that coke gas pipeline to this trail being built. U.S. Steel wanted the trail organizations to do all the environmental mitigation along that trail, basically pay for the cleanup of what U.S. Steel for 100 years had done to the environment along that stretch of maybe 3 or 4 miles of that coke gas pipeline. The amount of money in that paled or was overwhelming compared to how much it would cost to build that whole Great Allegheny Passage. That was not a responsibility, nor should it have been, for the trail organizations. Ultimately, U.S. Steel came along. And then the last holdout was the amusement park, Sandcastle, where the trail was coming out of Pittsburgh along the Monongahela Valley and then coming through the Monongahela Valley and the Steel Valley, and Sandcastle became the impediment. What Sandcastle wanted to have was the trail moved out on the state highway, State Route 837, which was impossible to do just from the standpoint of safety. There was not enough of the right-of-way left for the highway in order to have a safe passage for pedestrians or bikes. And so that literally became the holdout. Now, Sandcastle, to their credit, figured we want something out of this too. And so there was a quid pro quo. And in the whole world of politics, folks, you have to have compromises in this. So what ended up happening was Sandcastle got other money from the state and from the county in order to make certain access improvements better for their property and allow them to accommodate their guests more. But then also that trail connection came through. So as we walk away from all this and my presentation ends, I will tell you that, trail building 30 years ago and the network of trails that we have, particularly that gap section, was for the most part a fanciful idea and the belief of many that it would never happen. But because it was a coalition, because people came together, because they saw the need not only to advocate locally, but go to the state and the federal level, because they coordinated their funding requests to the foundations and to state and federal granting agencies, and they all began to work together, it became a reality. And that gap is just a segment of stories that you could take across the Commonwealth. I'll point to my colleagues in other heritage areas, the Delaware and Lehigh Canal on the eastern side of the state. What's taking place as you move north of Pittsburgh that's being run by Oil National Heritage Area along the Allegheny Trail, connecting up into the Great Lakes trails. And then if you go out of the state, just to our west, probably one of the most successful, not only fundraisers and trail development, but just trail building in the country, let alone within the 55 National Heritage Areas. Jeremy Morris knows him, our colleague, Dan Rice, who runs the Ohio and Erie Canal Corridor based in Akron. Look at those as models, not just what we did in Rivers of CO with our partners to make the gap a reality, but look at those as other models of what can be done, and use their good practices and best examples as things that you might be able to replicate. And I look forward to being on trails in West Virginia. So that's my presentation, and I'll leave it for questions at this point.
Unfortunately, we won't have any time for questions, but we appreciate it. So maybe we can reach out to Augie with any future questions, if that works for Augie.
That works.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. But I was just going to wrap it up just for the next 5 minutes or so. But thank you, Augie. I mean, that was a great wrap up to the that was a great wrap up for the overall conference, with people working together to really plan for that bigger vision, and then building the support of the government officials along the way to really make the impossible happen. So if we break it down and take some of those components and apply it to West Virginia here and what we're trying to do, like working together, that's the conference. Promoting a bigger vision, that's the updated statewide trails plan. And building support of the government officials, that's really the legislative trails caucus. So we have big components happening, and look forward to what we can do here. Just a couple wrap up things over the next 5 minutes or so. So we will upload any sessions that you may have missed tomorrow, hopefully, and they will be available until February. So go back and check those out, and we'll also upload all the resources, the chats, and everything else that's available. Stay up to date with West Virginia Trail by signing up for our newsletter or our email list. You can do that on the website, and it's wvtrail.org. And then in the next couple of months, we're going to be working out some details, just a few things. We're hoping to form an advisory board and a kind of a conference committee for 2022. We're going to form a board around West Virginia Trail as an organization. Hopefully make some progress on the legislative caucus, and when the weather is nice in the spring, hopefully do some regional meetings among the groups that you had yesterday. But in 2022, we are hoping to do an in-person conference, probably in the October range, which we're probably going to start planning next week. I think everyone will be excited about starting that planning again. But if you really want to get involved in any of these components, fill out the survey. An email should have went out about 30 minutes ago. It's a 2-minute survey. It just asks how we did and any comments you have about the conference for next year's conference, and then some options on ways to sign up for things to get involved in the future. But let's keep the momentum going. I mean, get involved with your local trail group, reach out to the groups that you met in the networking meetings, go meet your elected official and share your newly formed plans. But thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you in person in 2022.
Thank you, Augie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.